You know, I always say you break things down to basic shapes. You might look at this and think, well, where are the shapes in this hare? And I will show you. We're looking at this hare and you think, okay, where do I start? Now, a common misconception is you kind of trace an outline and you take it from there, but that'll lead you down a tricky route because it's very, very easy to lose track of where you are. So I maintain it's always best to break it down into basic shapes. So if I looked at this, I'd say, right, I can first off see a sphere for a skull. Inside and behind all that fur, there's a skull, there's a head, and that is fundamentally a circle. So I say, let's start with the circle, and then what else is there? I'd say, well, there's another little sphere there. That snout is very, very roughly made up of, it is a sphere. It's a sphere on top of that sphere. And if I looked for further basic shapes, I'd say, well, there's an eye there as well. And then once I've got those in, I'm looking for planes. I'm looking for areas of flatness, and I'm looking for any more shapes that I can find in there. And I'd say, I'd go so far as to say, there's a flat plane going down the front of his forehead like that. And if you take away the picture, you see, you've got the fundamental shape of that hare's head already there. You can almost recognize that as a hare. So I think that is where I'd start to draw this fella. So bear that in mind, the forehead, the eye, the nose, and the big sphere of the head, which is where we'll start. Okay, let's make a start. Right, grab your sketchbook. He says, we'll sketch this. We might get as far as throwing a bit of paint at it, I don't know, but we shall see. Right. Another thing to bear in mind is to get this position correctly on the page. It's very, very easy to start thinking, okay, well, eyes are always at the top of the head, so you stop up here. But if you look at this, you'll find that the eye is pretty much in the center of this. So you want to place it in the right place on the page. So that eye is pretty central. You want plenty, you don't want your ears going off the top. So get that eye in the middle of your page. I've already gone a little bit too high, but anyway, I'll run with it anyway, see how far it goes. But let's get that, the sphere of the heading. These are just light, sketchy, gestural marks. That eye is pretty much in the shape, and I'm keeping this sketchy as well. This is a sketchbook. This is where I experiment and play. So I'm not going to get too uptight about perfection. This is not a finished drawing. This is a sketch. In fact, if you look at the word, if you think about the word sketch, it's quite, I mean, if you say, well, that's quite a sketchy description of something, it means that it's a little bit ambiguous and a little bit open to interpretation. And that's what a sketch is. It's just, you're feeling your way, you're interpreting something yourself. So let's keep it nice and loose, open to interpretation. Now, you remember those basic shapes? We've got the snout there, and then there's a plane that kind of comes down there like so. Nice and loose and sketchy. And already with those three basic shapes, and you can see the shape of this fella's head emerging already. We'll get a few, we'll get these ears in as well. So what I'm doing is I'm just cross-referencing, I'm looking the eyes there, the ear goes up from the eye in that direction. This ear, now of course these ears are shapes, but they're quite convoluted. If you look at this, it's probably a cylinder, but it's a half a cylinder, and you can see inside the cylinder. But if you understand and you read that as a shape, it'll start to make more sense. So just come down there and just follow the lines like that. Not going to go too overboard on the body because the head's the thing that I'm more interested in. All right, I get accused of going too quickly, so I'll take it nice and slowly. So you catch in. You've got the sphere of the head in. You've got the sphere of the snout in. You've got that eye there, and you've got that flat plane. His forehead, his snout that comes down there. And if things are in the right direction, you can start to be more definite about where things are. So I'm having a quick look at this nose here, and we fleshed it out as a basic sphere, but it's also spheres within spheres. There's a smaller little area around here which is also round. You know, it's almost like. And as I feel my way around this drawing, I'm starting to just put in the landmarks. That little cheek, that's not a cheek, is it? I don't know what it is. And also, if you look careful, there's a chin under here. You look really carefully. This is chin, which is quite nice to get in. So gradually building up all the important landmarks. If you go up this snout, you can see that outside edge has got a character to it. We've got it down as a flat plane, but it's a flat plane with character. So over here, you've got the other eye socket. In fact, the eye sockets, that's almost like a tube in itself. Those eye sockets protrude. So that comes up, and his profile exposes that eye socket on the other side of his head. So now you can see I'm making a more definite line now, and things are starting to take shape. I've fleshed and felt my way in with these sketchy lines, and now when I decide that those sketchy lines are in the right place, I can start to firm them up. And if I think that eye is in the right place, it is there. So let's try and just make a little bit more sense. What's characteristic of these eyes is that it's got quite a distinct black rim to it. And of course, the eyeball is a sphere as well. It's not just a flat window into his head. It's an eyeball that sits in there. And there's a lot of black around there. There's a lot of black. Okay. Let's just make a bit more of a definite statement about these ears and say, okay, they come around there like so. And that comes around there like so. Just kind of getting. Make a note of the edge detail as well, you know, a bit of fur up there. So there's a jaggy line there. It's not a straight, clean line. A lot of hair there, coming down to there like so. Back of the head. See, that sketchy line that I put in early on, I can see now that it's not quite right. It's a bit low. And I'm looking at, look at the eye, and that his back comes off at an angle like that. It's like 4 o'clock. I'm more like 5 o'clock down here. So I'm going to adjust that to 4 o'clock and realize that his back actually comes down there like so. Constantly cross-referencing to see where things lie. Just going to get his pupil in and leaving that little white highlight, which is crucial. Now we've got things kind of in the right place. Let's have a look at where the light's coming from. The light's coming from the right. if we go back and have a look at this, we've got our structures in, so we can lose those. The light is coming from the right because you can see his ears lit on the right, his cheeks lit on the right. And if you look very closely into his eye, you can see a reflection of his environment. You can see he's sitting in a field. You can see the sun's just dropping down over the horizon. You can even see the sun disappearing behind a little bush there, look. So you can tell that that's a nice evening or morning light coming from the right. And if you want to really assess it more clearly, it's good to squint, because if you squint at something, you lose the detail and you lose the color, and you can see the patches of light and dark more clearly. So for example, if I squinted at that, you end up with something more like that. And that makes it easier to see what's going on. You can see more clearly now that the sun over there is coming down, it's hitting the side of his snout, and it's lighting this side of the face, and it's leaving his little nose and his cheeks and his forehead, somewhat that they're more in shadow. You can see the darker areas more clearly if you squint. All right. So, bearing that in mind, I'm just going to put in a few areas of tone, like there. That's a dark side. This is a dark side. Down here, this is in shadow. He's kind of got shade around there. Inside here is very dark. His chin is in darkness. And across here as well, this is dark. I'm just putting in a few guidelines because I think it might be quite nice to try and throw some paint at this and use the paint to describe the values. This is a dark area here where his cheek rolls round towards his nose. So in here, it's dark. And of course, under here, underneath his chin on his chest, is very dark too. So with those brief guidelines in place, let's mix up some paint and see if we can describe the light and shade with paint. Now it can be quite tricky because obviously the color of his plumage is the color of his fur is going to affect the value. So it can be quite tricky to try and see the shapes and the lights and the darks beyond the color of the fur, and it can make things tricky, but let's have a go anyway. So just grab some paint, grab the kitchen roll. Never go anywhere without the kitchen roll. And let's mix up some colors. Now, in terms of color, we have got a pretty brown colored hare, but I think it's quite nice to create those browns out of the primaries. So I'm going to mix up a blue. I know it sounds a little bit crazy, but I'm going to make a bit of blue paint there, make a bit of a puddle. Clean my brush, dry it off, make a bit of yellow. Doesn't really matter which of your colours you use, it's arbitrary really. We're just going to bring it to life with a bit of colour. Blue, yellow, some red. I don't want red. I want a kind of brown, a warm. I'm going to go for this brown here. Let's make some of that. I've also got, I'm going to mix up, I've got a bit of Payne's grey here. That's a very dark blue grey that I'm going to use to introduce some areas of shadow. But I might start off with the grey on his ears. Now, I'm going to try and paint as loosely as I've sketched this. So I'm going to throw caution to the wind, and I'm going to really start to try and loosen up with this. I'm going to go in with this grey and introduce some colour, introduce some value into the ears like this to start off with. And I want that edge to soften. So I'm just going in with some clean water, and that also activates the surface, and it makes things start to happen. And I'm going to, it's quite a nice silvery grey that I'm going to use down his forehead as well. I'm going to try and just go in quickly and get some of these values in like this. Again, softening the edges. And using the paint, I'm just confirming these areas of tone that I sketched in with my pencil. You see down here, around the eye, on his top of his cheek, underneath here. Right, let's warm this up with some of the brown. There's a nice brown there. The brown comes out. And when you drop the brown, when you drop paint into wet paint, of course, that's what they call wet in wet painting. It can start to make some really rather lovely effects. You know, I've splattered it because that activates the surface. It makes me lose a little bit of inhibition. Going to warm it up with some yellow. Just come around with a little bit of yellow around there. Maybe a yellow in there. Warm that nose up. And I'm just coming in with some clean water just to soften things out a bit. I don't really want too many hard-edged brush strokes. I want this to blend. I want this to come down and mingle softly. So just try and paint this in a really relaxed way. Bit of blue maybe, bit of blue on the top of the head. And all these colours are going to work together and hopefully blend to describe see, look at that running down there. That's going to turn into something rather nice. Coming back in with this grey, and I'm going to emphasize some of the darker areas. Because this is now wet, I'm just dropping these colours in with my brush. I'm not really painting. I'm just plopping paint down and letting it do its thing. I like this bit of fringing around the top here, so I'm actually going to paint that like that. See? And let's get a bit darker inside this here. If I want to get really dark, I'm not going to go to my puddle of paint. I'm going to go straight into there and get some really strong pigment. To really take that down. Now, where else? I'm just going to start to make a thing. Just going to get a little bit of, I said he's got rather nice dark line around his eye. Right, let's work this fur up a little bit. It's a bit cool around here, so I can still get some value in here just by dropping that colour in. Back into this paint and try and put a bit of definition in his snout. She's got a very distinctive kind of Y-shaped formation here. That nose and is defining like that. and underneath here is in deep shadow. So as soon as I start to add some value into there, look, that chin suddenly disappears underneath. Now I'm quite enjoying this Payne's grey straight out of the pan, and because I'm painting it onto an already wet surface, it's going to soften off nicely. Because whenever I add that value there, it immediately just disappears. That whatever the darkness, the shadow I create with my darker value just rolls away underneath. Now, of course, the texture of his fur's tricky to paint. It's not just flat colour. And it might be nice to just maybe start to introduce suggestions that this isn't an ordinary smooth surface, it's got texture. So I've got a sharpened end on my brush and I'm just I'm scratching into the surface, which gives it a kind of texture. It's subtle, but it just disrupts the paint and makes you realize, this is fur. I don't know if you can see that. Let me bring this a little bit closer. It's chaotic, it's loose, but it's got life and it's got action. It's got energy. And that's what drawing and painting is all, sort of sketching at least, is about. Getting that feeling of energy into your painting. So carrying on, let's get some more value in. I think I'm going to describe this cheek round here. Let's go in there with a bit of, we've been a little bit tame on the blue. Let's get some blue in there. Just look at this. He's got a blue, but I'm trying to now build up the values, and I'm just squinting. I'm squinting at this, and I'm squinting at this, and I'm looking to see where I need some value. We've got to work some value around this eye. We've got tone down here that I've neglected. So maybe I'll put a bit of that in. And now, because this surface is starting to dry, I can use brush strokes. I can actually make marks with my paint. Because the surface is dry, it's going to leave a hard edge. So I'm just thinking that's quite nice to come down there with some dashes like that. Squinting at this, I can see that underneath his eye there and underneath the front of his cheek there, they're really dark areas. So, let's maybe try and boost those values up, make them darker. Here needs taking down. And I'm dancing around my palette. I'm not really too bothered what the color is I'm putting on. I'm more interested in getting the value, the lightness and the darkness. It's far more important than the color. So now I'm building this up with just dancing around my palette, using different colors to control the look of the painting. So now if I sit back, everything's in the right place. Just comparing the two, I can see I've got to go much darker here. I've got to go much darker. I can carry on charging in and describing the shape of his head with paint. I don't want to overdo it, but at the same time, I do want to describe the form. A bit more of that, I think. Take that snout down a bit further. I don't want to go black. I don't want to go solid colour, because that's a bit dull. This still needs taking right down. There's tone in here, there's value in there. I could spend a bit of time. This is still too light. So that can go down. There's a bit of form described there that makes his snout stand out. The tip of his nose is darker. That's rather nice to put a bit of value in there. Whiskers, can't miss the whiskers. They're white against dark here. Tricky, but maybe if I just, again, with my sharpened stick, just drag through the existing paint. Better if it's dry. And where I can't drag the paint away, I'm just coming back with my pencil and putting a few hints in like that. Just enough to make it apparent. He's looking okay. Now, let's try and do something with this eye. The eyes, well, the eye, I think, is a slightly more orange version than the fur. So I'm just going to mix a bit of that brown. Maybe add a touch of red, cheer it up a bit, warm things up. Always nice to get a little bit of warmth in a painting. So let's just make that a bit more interesting like that. Leaving the top half quite pale because, you know, we looked in closely in his eye and saw the sky reflected. It's quite nice to keep that. That's a rather nice colour. I might actually bring a bit of that down here. And then, as I say, as things start to dry off, you can start to paint with your brush. That's a bit too eye-catching, a bit too dominant. So I'm just going to dab that back a bit. That's better. Didn't want that to be too noticeable. Now, just taking back and having a breather, just looking at it, I can see we've got to darken down this ear. So I'm going to go back into my Payne's Grey, get a bit of strength in it, and just put a nice dash of tone in there. Not really, but I want to soften it off. So I quickly rinse, dab off my brush, and just come up there, and that's going to lose that hard edge. And you can see that suddenly now starts to roll round instead of it being an abrupt change of value. I could be getting into the realms of fiddling here if I'm not careful. Just suggest that shoulder. Having said that, the light is coming down there. This is a very pale area here. You can see how much lighter it is there compared to there. See? I mean, I know it's fur and it's brown, it's got its own color, but if you try and assess those two areas, that is light, that is dark. And I want to try and say that here. It's not always easy to see, but this is much, his chest is much darker than his back. So let's just try and, even though his chest is, I mean, this fur, his chest is probably paler in terms of fur, but it's darker in terms of light. So just right, I think we're kind of just about there. Let's see. If I were to darken any other areas down, I'd be tempted to maybe, let's see, I'm looking from one to the other. Probably a little bit pale here. Snout is probably a bit pale, but there's some nice paint effects in there, so I don't want to damage that too much. If I were to do anything, what would I maybe do? I'd maybe just add a bit more here. And of course, watercolor is an additive medium, so I'm just adding color that's not necessarily very dark, but it's combining with the colors underneath to just turn things darker. Gradually, every layer that I put on gradually darkens down everything else. Gradually darkens things down. It's what they mean by an additive medium. It just, the more you add, the darker it gets. There. I could carry on fiddling if I wanted for a while here, but I don't really want to fiddle too much. Maybe a little bit of that. Nice. I don't want to lose this highlight around his eye socket, but I just want to take it down a little bit. So what I have done, the bits that I've left light are this snout, side, oops. The side of his snout there, I've left pale. Around his eye socket, I've left pale. There's a bit down here that I've left pale, and this cheek, this jowl here, I've kind of left that pale as well. So I've tried to follow the value structure of the photograph, but I've been nice and loose and free. Where it is white against the background, I like to do this. I sometimes just throw a little bit of tone in to define this edge here and this edge here. So, yeah, before I go, let's just throw a bit of green in there, just like that. And that, you know, it kind of describes his environment, but it also describes the edge of the pale areas. So for example, there's a white line up there where if I do that, that white line's defined by the green. And I just soften the edge because I don't want it to have too hard an edge. And the same here, this ear. Just define the edge of that ear. And just to balance things up, just put a bit in here as well. And then soften the edge with clean water, or as clean as you can possibly get it. And maybe put a bit of texture in this, so just add a little bit of interest. Okay, I think he's about done. If I couldn't resist fiddling, I'd maybe come in here and maybe put a few more bits in here. I could probably carry on defining or suggesting fur with a few pencil marks. Because they're hairy fellows, aren't they? Maybe this eye socket would benefit from a few marks. But other than that, I'm tempted to call this guy done. Yeah. Fiddling now. Nice. There he is. Quick little 20-minute sketch, nice and loose and lively. All right, everybody, I'm going to say goodbye. Unmute yourselves if you wish, and I will see you next Thursday.
Brilliant. See you next week. Martin. Absolutely brilliant.
Thank you, Martin.
Good. I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you, Martin.
Thank you very much. Happy Easter.
Happy Easter, everybody. See you next week.
Happy Easter. All the best, everyone.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
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 Stay safe.
Thank you.